Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Unleash with Eva. Today's episode is dedicated to just discussing mental health and the faith community. We've had a lot going on in the media with some high profile figures, but also people, everyday people losing their lives to suicide. And so tonight with me in the studio via phone is Camille Underwood and Kanisha Billingsley. Camille, how are you tonight?
I am well. Eva, how are you?
I'm doing great. Go ahead and tell our listeners very quick who you are and what your background is.
Okay, I'm Camille Underwood, and I'm a mental health professional within Birmingham City Schools. Work with special needs students and a child and adolescent psychiatrist. But I actually like to refer to myself as a mental health advocate because outside of my role as an outpatient therapist, I just do as much as I possibly can to try to promote a level of awareness about mental health in the community at large, but especially the African American community. And so for tonight, I'm going to keep on my mental health advocate hat.
Awesome. And so also from Atlanta, Georgia, we have Kanisha Billingsley. Kanisha, how are you?
I'm doing well, Eva.
Go ahead and tell our listeners who you are.
Well, I am an ordained pastor in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm in the midst of my third church plant here. This is also my 20th year of ministry. I'm coming off of a 1 year and some odd month sabbatical where I just took a pause and I took a break for the sake of my own mental wellness. And I'm excited to talk about what it looks like as a practitioner of spirituality and spiritual health when one stands at the crossroads and realizes, okay, I have to step all the way back so that I can step into a higher dimension and healthier dimension of my own being. So I'm looking forward to tonight's conversation.
Wow. Well, I'm just glad to be here on the line with both of you. So, just in light, Camille, I'm gonna start with you. In light of the suicides that have hit media, and I know of these people, but I don't know them, so therefore I really don't judge. I don't know what happened with them or what state of mind they may have been in. But I heard a lot of terminology just getting thrown around on Facebook. I've heard it from the pulpit. People saying things about mental illness, mental health. We don't even know these people. When somebody says mental illness versus mental health, what's the difference, Camille?
Well, it's really just a matter of choice, and it's a matter, again, of awareness and education. Mental illness kind of just really specifies what you're dealing with when you're talking about a level of a brain disease or disorder, and understanding that there is a diagnosis and that there are symptoms and there is actually a course of treatment to what is ailing an individual. Mental health kind of is more encompassing, but it still addresses mental illness. And if we want to use terminology that I think kind of catches all, you want to focus on wellness as a whole. But within wellness, mental health fits in as far as maintenance and understanding that, okay, you've got to play your part in maintaining a healthy mindset, a healthy way of thinking, which of course affects your behavior. But mental illness speaks directly to several diagnoses that we might know, generally speaking, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, one of the more popular ones that people tend to look at as just one of those things like, oh my goodness, it has one of the worst stigmas, I think, when it comes to mental illness. And so people use the terms interchangeably, and they kind of are one and the same, but mental health, I think, kind of encompasses the concept that we really are dealing with a health issue as well as an illness.
So when we talk about, and before I go to Kanisha, but when we start talking about things like schizophrenia, bipolar, or mental illness, there are people who have credentials and that are able to make these diagnoses. Just me sitting back, observing somebody for 20 seconds or for a minute or hearing a news story, I can't necessarily diagnose that person, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's interesting. I just read an article. Not all suicide is a result of an actual mental illness or, an actual diagnosis. It can be a situational circumstantial kind of thing where they're dealing with some relationship issues, or in that moment things seem to be, too pressing and too heavy, and perhaps a sabbatical might be necessary, but whatever's going on, they're unable to manage the stress of that situation. And unfortunately, suicide can be their ultimate response. And a lot of assumptions are made about mental health and mental illness, period. And so that's why I use the term awareness to address, to really try to attack the stigma, especially in the African American community. I can't help but kind of emphasize that, because that's where I live and that's where I function, most of the course of my days. And so if we're going to really try to address some things, we've got to keep it real and call a thing a thing. And so within our community, that stigma weighs heavily on most folks, but especially people who have a diagnosis and actually are recovering and trying to deal with their mental illness.
Right. And so, Kanisha, I was on Facebook earlier this week, and someone I really look up to, Reverend Traci Blackmon, just flat out made a post very pointed and said, you know what, y'all are doing a lot of judgment, even in saying, that somebody just diagnosing somebody as being depressed or having a certain mental illness. And everybody that commits suicide are not necessarily people that are alone. There are people around us that we see. They're not always isolated. And basically it's telling church people to stop trying to judge a situation and learn how to be present for people. I don't know if you saw that post.
And you know what? I wish I had been active on social media so I could have read her post. So I can't really respond to that post because I haven't read it and I'm driving, so I can't look it up. But what I can say, based upon your summary, I can speak to the deficiency in terms of theological and spiritual education that is happening in many Black churches across the nation. Wow. There is a way in which we are distorting the reality of pain, a way in which we are holding people hostage to poorly developed concepts of what it means to be alive and what it means to be wounded. And so many people, when they go out of routine, out of passion, out of love, to church, to Bible study, to worship, they're not receiving the tools that they need to sit in the tension that most things are true at the same time. For example, you can have a relationship with God and get cancer, true at the same time. You can believe that God is a healer, get cancer in your body, and not be healed at the same time. And we're not teaching people that life happens. Everything is not the devil. Everything is not God. Most things is life. And in order to deal with that, you have to be able to sit in the tension that your preference is not always your experience. I need to say that again because that just spoke to me. Your preference is not always your experience. And it takes maturity. It takes intentionality. But those kinds of sermons and Bible studies don't get you big offerings. So we have to also look at the ways in which capitalism informs and shapes what we are teaching and preaching.
All right. That was powerful, Kanisha. And so let's talk about, and you're right, because Kanisha, we're kind of in the same vein. I tell people all the time, you got to work through some stuff. And there's some things we ought to be able to work through within the church, right? But what I wanted to say was, being present for people, creating safe space for people, and some people would even call it holding space for people. Camille, what does that look like? If you were in a church, does it look like to have a church where there were people there that created safe spaces for you?
Oh wow! It would start in the pulpit and end in the fellowship hall, perhaps, or just throughout the culture of the particular church. But when I say, I emphasize, it starts in the pulpit for a pastor or reverend or whatever to be transparent enough, to reveal whatever personal struggles they may be experiencing as it relates to everyday life or even a clinical diagnosis, because as human as I am, so is a pastor. And there have been recent reports of actual pastors disclosing their battle, their struggle with clinical depression or bipolar disorder. But it starts with using the terminology that actually acknowledges that this is something that we have to address and work on, and saying mental illness or mental health in the pulpit and not just making it a faith issue. There's a thing that concerned me about this sermon that I heard that kind of started this all up for me was, and the pastor, he was genuine. His intention was real and true. And pretty much what he said was, life is hard. We kind of just put everybody in the same basket. Life is hard. And if Anthony Bourdain would have called me, I would have told him that joy comes in the morning. And what made me cringe in my seat was, unbeknownst to him, that sermon in and of itself could serve as an opportunity to further isolate someone who's struggling with a mental illness to the point where they're feeling like, wow, not only am I struggling with this depression, but now my faith is not enough. My faith is not enough because I don't happen to know that joy cometh in the morning. That joy has not come from me in any particular morning. And so a level of education could help him understand that, hey, there are people in my congregation who are struggling with things, and it's not just your everyday life stresses. It's not economic issues, or clinically speaking, it's not just psychosocial stressors. There's an actual physiological something that's going on with an imbalance in hormones, something going on in their brain that even with medication and different courses of treatment, there's still suffering that takes place. And even with prayer and even with reading the word and going to Bible study, there's still suffering that takes place. And so beginning to have that conversation and providing resources to the members of the congregation to understand that, hey, not only are we going to pray for you and with you, but we're going to join you in your treatment efforts, provide you with this referral, reach out, let you know that we're here and that everything is okay, and that we support you. And let that conversation be one that changes the culture within that church and takes away the judgment and the bias and the need to kind of feel the guilt and shame that kind of comes along with the stigma of saying, hey, I have a mental illness. I'm struggling with this diagnosis. I'm in treatment. I see a therapist.
If you are a pastor and you are listening, please find a clinical pastoral education unit, CPE, which focuses on you and the way you give care and how you frame yourself and how you think about yourself. Find somewhere, go there and be trained, because seminary alone is not enough. You need a space where people are holding you accountable for what you say, for what you pray, for what you think, for the energy you bring into the room, so that in times of crisis, you don't produce sermons with rhetorical violence like what you just said, because that was violence. When we think about the ethics of rhetoric, the ethics of sacred rhetoric, for anybody to position themselves as God, that's problematic. And also, it's interesting to me in the Black church, Eva, how we use call and response only for affirmation. We use call and response to say, go ahead, preacher, you talking now. Amen. Oh, that's good. When will the congregants, the pews, use call and response as a point of accountability? Wait a minute, Reverend. I can't go with you there now. Oh, hold on, Reverend. That ain't right. Oh, wait, Reverend. That's out of order. Because until the pew holds the pulpit accountable for its negligence, we're going to continue to perpetuate these ill-fitted theologies and paradigms and constructs that, like you said, Camille, are literally killing people.
Right.
Correct. And I agree. I agree with both of you. And I appreciate, Camille, you being transparent, and for you coming back, Kanisha, and just kind of hitting it home like it's really problematic. And I think I was reading something really, it's interesting that Camille will call me to just kind of say, hey, this is what I experienced. Because I had just been reading something where it appears that sometimes we get caught up, oh, you're physical, there's a physical world and a spiritual, but people are also emotional. They're also intellectual. They're also social. There's parts of people that we leave out sometimes when we think of them, or when we call ourselves trying to teach them or preach to them, that we're missing, that there's a piece of people that we can't see. That's like, say for instance, if I had a disability, or if I had something that was a temporary disability physically, so if I was born, not being able to walk, or secondly, temporary where I broke my leg, you can see that. Right. But sometimes you can't really see what's going on with a person emotionally unless you're intentional about holding space for them. And so sometimes even in the sermon, we have to realize that we can be holding space for somebody or taking up space, sucking the air out of the room with logic as that. And I think we all could do better being more sensitive in our preaching, just thinking about who's in the room.
Right.
Sometimes in that transparency you were talking about earlier, sometimes I may mention sometimes my divorce. God knows I don't glorify divorce, but sometimes I will mention it out of a sense of transparency, right? And I can see people in the room cringe from the very thought of it. And, my thing is, if I'm free, I want you to be free. Y'all don't need y'all thinking I stood up here and I've never gone through anything. I never had to work through any tension. I had to never go through any healing. And I think once we have gone through something, and then I also believe, like, even when it comes to mental health, mental illness, when we have actually walked with somebody, we may be more sensitive, but we don't have to actually walk with everybody. Go do what Kanisha said. Go get you some CPE credits. Sit down and listen and help somebody work through your stuff. And I believe a large parts of pastors ain't never sit in front of anybody else. They could critically give them feedback on themselves, not just how great of a preacher you are, but where you are spiritually and emotionally. Yeah. So, I kind of got worked up because it really is a topic, some of this stuff just kind of hits home for me. And the stuff that you hear these people walking around talking about, it could be the greatest, whatever, deliver of a message, but you just really think about, like, somebody left out of here wounded.
Right.
Or in a worse place than they came, because guess what? Joy ain't coming for them in the morning.
Right. Absolutely.
And if we're so honest, in various areas of our lives, we can bear witness to the fact that if you wait on joy, you're going to stop living in many regards. You know what I mean? Like, if you're waiting to be happy or to feel good or to be enthusiastic, you're going to find yourself in a holding pattern, particularly for those of us who are waiting on things that require more than human effort, or things that require more than an easy fix. Joy is not the impetus for survival. The desire to keep living is the impetus for survival.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the complication comes too, and it's a matter of education and awareness, when you kind of bunch it all together and say everyday stresses, and we're the happiest people, and we have more than these two people had everything. They had it all. So how could it get to this point? And it's a lack of information, knowledge, and understanding, and wisdom, I would go so far as to say. And so it's really some communication, because it is so damaging. It's so damaging, and it's, Kanisha, to hear you say, to be empowered from the pew enough to be able to say, for me to feel like comfortable enough to say from that pew, hold up, Pastor, you know what? I'm a mental health advocate. I can't follow you on this one. Not for 1 second did I feel like I could stand up and say that. I struggled with even, trying to approach him on a personal level so we could have a dialogue and have a conversation. And ended up, reaching out to Eva, because I'm like, hey, you know what? I've got to get this off of me, because it really gripped me to a point where I was frozen after that sermon, just even thinking about anyone who left that church who was already suffering and struggling, and wondering, questioning their own faith, because the joy is not coming for them in the morning, and that really kind of possibly serving as just that brick wall that finally fell down. It's like, okay, that's enough. That's it. No more. Enough is enough. This is too much. This is good. It's just, and it's that, but that culture and that opportunity to empower someone from the pew enough to even question and say, hey, like you said, that call and response, we all feel we got to say, hey, amen, Pastor, yes, yes, yes. Or if we don't agree, we say nothing. And what I've learned is inaction speaks so much louder than anything else. So much louder. That not doing anything at all is so much more damaging. So I'm hoping, I'm praying that this discussion kind of takes wings and hits home and gets to places where, it really sparks a conversation, within the clergy, outside, within the pew, to be able to say, hey, we've got to address this. We've got to talk about it, get that dialogue going, get the resources lined up, get some mental health 101 training for clergy and their support staff, enough to be able to use the right terminology or even Google it, research it before we let God. So we say, hey, this is the word for the day. There has to be some checks and balances, and I'm not a clergy person, so I don't really know how that kind of thing works, but it really has served me well to hear you say that is so necessary for us to feel empowered from the pews. Wow.
And I want to stay in this vein, and for pastors, I want to say three things. One way that we can empower the pew to talk back to us, okay, so if someone says, wait a minute, I don't agree in the middle of the sermon, that could become disruptive. But like you say, we've been using silence to let the preacher know they were on the wrong street for a long time. So we will keep that. We will keep the silence. But also, as pew members, congregants, we can go to the pastor and say, hey, we would like to form a talkback session. So after you finish preaching on Sunday, maybe Monday or Tuesday, we want to be able to gather together and talk with you about the sermon. We want to talk about things we didn't really understand. We want to talk about things we really struggled with. Like, this is a part of the Dream Life Fellowship culture. That's the third church plant I'm working on. At Dream Life Fellowship, people know that they can reach out to me at any point to say, after the sermon is over, hey, I was really struggling with this, or hey, I didn't agree with that, or hey, what did you mean by this? It's a part of our culture because I mostly pastor seminarians, and so of course that's a part of our culture. But even for non-seminarians, folks have gotten comfortable with seeing the sermon as a piece of what we have co-created with God as a community, and our responsibility is to ensure that we are in alignment with what we believe the gospel says and who we believe Jesus is for us today. Another piece is, pastors, stop feeling pressed to address things immediately from the pulpit. The world is in a constant state of crisis. Your next sermon, when a crisis happens, does not have to address that crisis specifically. And I think a lot of people experience this reckless, violent rhetoric because they're rushing to say something about what has happened. If you want to say something about what has happened, have a pastoral care moment before you preach. We acknowledge that 2 suicides happened, and it was, these prominent people. We are holding space for their families. Those of you who are in the service, if you would like to talk to someone more about it, our caregivers will be available after the service. And this week's sermon is about, and you go on with the plan that you had. Don't try to broach a subject that you are not ready to consider deeply. And also, pastors, if something happens and you know it is beyond your knowledge base and your ability, you should have a network of people who can come in on that particular Sunday and lead the service and preach the sermon. Prime example, Dream Life Fellowship. I don't even know that we were a year old and Pulse happened. The Pulse shooting, the nightclub for same-gender loving people happened. And Dream Life Fellowship is a bold, courageous place. We believe in radical love and extreme acceptance. We have LGBTQIA people as a part of our community and leading our worship services, participating, all of that, fully alive, fully free. And when that happened, I knew immediately, this isn't the Sunday for Pastor Kanisha, because I don't exist on these intersections. But what we needed was a phone call away, because Pastor Kanisha participates in intimate relationships and knowing people deeply from various spectrums of life and identities. So what did Pastor Kanisha do? She called one of her dear queer friends, who's also a clinician, to come in and preach that Sunday. For me, it would have been a miscarriage of love and presence if I preached that Sunday, knowing that there are resources in the broader community who would be a better fit to hold the space for queer people.
So, Camille, as we get ready to close out, what are your parting words for somebody who may be listening to this podcast that may be struggling or may actually be clergy?
Well, let's talk about it. You know, if you're listening to the podcast and, you know, you heard anything that concerned you, gripped you, let's keep this dialogue, this conversation going. You know, let's have meetings. Let's have a summit, whatever it takes to kind of bridge the divide or bridge the gap that may exist, we know exists between the faith community and the mental health community, and parishioners who need the support and the assistance of not only a pastor, but a licensed professional therapist, maybe even a psychiatrist, and use the terminology that will actually support the parishioner instead of bringing that guilt and bringing more shame to something that already exists. So if we can promote the awareness and attack the stigma within the church, it'll be awesome. It'll really be awesome. That's the path and direction that we need to go in.
Awesome. Kanisha, do you have any parting words?
Yes, indeed. For those of you who are listening, understand that your body is one of the most complex organisms in the world. And just like with any other part of your body, if you had consistent pain in your legs, in your arms, if you noticed that your vision started to blur or that your hearing wasn't as astute as it once was, you would go see about those parts of yourself. You would go to a doctor who specializes in legs, arms, eyes, and ears. So is it with your brain. Your brain can get off kilter or not be as sharp or not be as focused, not be as consistent, not provide the hormones that you need in a portion that is regulated for your body. Therefore, you need to take your brain, your heart, your emotions, your spirit to see people who are trained to deal with that part of you. And if you are listening and you are really dealing with suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideations, Eva's going to provide the number to the hotline that you can call. But I just want to give you 4 words that you've said all of your life, but maybe you've never said it in this shape, in a sentence, in this form. I am not okay. If you can just say those 4 words to somebody you trust and know will see about you and journey with you to the help that you need, I am not okay. That's all you got to say. You don't have to explain what it is to them. Just let them know I am not okay. And then set forth the action that you need to receive the help for the parts of you that are not working as well as you'd like them.
This is Eva. Thank you for tuning in. I want to go ahead and remind you the number to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline that you can call 24 hours a day is 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255. I'm Pastor Eva Melton. You can find me each and every Sunday at 11 o'clock a.m. at the Firm Foundation Church in Avondale. You can call us at 205-500-1398. You've been listening to Unleashed with Eva. Join us for worship tomorrow at the Firm Foundation Church, 131 41st Street South in Avondale at 11 o'clock a.m.